Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our succession planning webinar for the month of May. My name is Helen Schroeder. I'm the marketing coordinator at Sigma Assessment Systems, and I will be your co-pilot for today. Hopefully we don't have any technical challenges, but I'm here in case they happen. And joining us today to host our presentation is Dr. Ariana Thompson. For those of you who are new to Sigma, I'll just give a brief introduction. We are a professional services firm that offers talent development, succession planning, and psychological assessments for organizations like your own who are looking to develop internal talent pools. Sigma has been in business for over 50 years, so as a company, we have a lot of experience, and we're excited to be bringing some of our highlights from succession planning to you today. A little bit of housekeeping just to get us started. We have about 60 minutes together. For the first 45 minutes or so, Ariana will walk you through the webinar content to explain what succession planning is, why it matters, and our 6-step process that can help you get a succession plan off the ground and started. We will be recording the session, so no need to take notes. We'll also send a copy of the slides around to all of you once the session is over. And we'll reserve 15 minutes at the end to go through any questions that you may have. So feel free to use the Q&A or the chat. I will be monitoring those, and we will take some time to go through those together. Anything that doesn't get addressed today, we'd be happy to follow up via email, but for now, please do use those. They're available to you, and we'd love to give you all of the wisdom that our consultants have collected over the years. Now is a great time to pick their minds and see what they can provide. And speaking of them, without any further ado, I will introduce you to Dr. Ariana Thompson, and she will kick off our presentation for the day. So Ariana is one of our senior leadership consultants. She believes in positively transforming the modern day workplace through thought-provoking, evidence-based insights. Ariana is a subject matter expert in executive leadership, succession management, wellness cultures, and employee growth. In her work at Sigma, she supports executive teams with succession planning and leadership development and assessments. So you are all in great hands today. Thank you, Dr. Ariana Thompson, for being with us, and I'll pass it off to you now to get us started.
Thank you, Helen. Welcome, everybody, to our webinar, How to Build a Comprehensive Succession Plan. Today, for our webinar agenda, we'll be starting with the basics, including what is succession planning, and how does it differ from traditional replacement hiring? And why is it important for your organization and worth investing in? Then we'll jump in to our comprehensive 6-step process that Sigma has developed over the years and continue to refine, working with many clients around how can we do succession planning best in organizations and have the success that we're looking for. Then we'll close out with a few tips, including common pitfalls in succession planning, considering the biggest hurdle, which is implementation, and why you might want to work with consultants. So with that, let's jump in. What is succession planning? If you've never heard of succession planning before, we have a really great definition for you here. Succession planning is the process of identifying and developing internal talent to fill critical roles when vacancies occur. So I know that this definition, while it is short, is a bit of a mouthful. So I just want to highlight some key terms here. So you're really focused on identifying and developing talent. So even though you're looking forward to where the organization is going to be going and who's going to be taking it over, that's really first looking at internal talent, seeing who you have and how you can develop them. And the purpose is to fill critical roles when vacancies occur. So acknowledging that turnover is a part of organizations and being prepared for when that turnover occurs is the most important. And robust succession plans share a few core features. First off, it's goal-oriented. You know why you're doing succession planning, what you hope to achieve, and how you're going to get there. It's also ongoing over time. So some people think that succession planning is like a strategic planning where you just do it one day or workshop it over 1 week and then you're ready for the future. But succession planning has a lot of inputs and moving parts of it. So you have to continually look at it. You actually have to develop your talent and prepare them. There's a lot of activity that is involved in succession planning, which is why it's not just a one and done, but an ongoing process. And due to this, it must be flexible to changing needs. circumstances or priorities. So if you change your organizational design and you add another person to your C-suite, that will impact your succession plan. If someone who is a top candidate for your CEO position leaves the organization, you're going to have to update your succession plan and work on developing somebody new. So there's all sorts of ways that there is ongoing change in organizational structure, and succession planning really needs to keep up with that and even adapt with it. But once you do this process, a good succession plan will help you do a few different things. It will help you build a pool of qualified candidates for each critical role. So you'll be identifying all of your critical roles across your organization and then developing qualified candidates. So then you have ideally multiple people who have been developed as a potential successor. And then when the time comes, meaning the vacancy is present, that's when you can look at your many qualified candidates and choose the best person for the role once that time comes. In this process, it'll provide opportunities for employee growth and development, and that's really huge in this day and age. The workforce today is looking for opportunities to grow, to be developed, to ideally have internal promotion in the organization. So people want to feel invested in, and if they're not being challenged and as if they're growing, they might even leave the organization to pursue this elsewhere. And then lastly, it will increase confidence in the company's ability to fill vacant roles, which can help your operational efficiency. So if this is not present and someone leaves the organization, and then you find yourself scrambling, you didn't know this person would leave, you didn't expect this, you're not sure who could take it over, you feel stressed, nobody's completing the activity of this role. That's kind of what we're trying to address with succession planning, really having a methodical approach, preparing in advance, and alleviating stress when people leave the organization. And then I'll just add one more point to here as well, that for anyone who's considering succession planning in the organization who's more senior and who has perhaps built the company from the ground up or been involved in this company for a long time, they might feel an emotional connection to what the company is doing and where it's going to go in the future. So succession planning can really help you plan for your legacy as a leader in an organization and help the next generation carry that legacy forward. So a lot of good things can come from succession planning. So overall, succession plans are important because they provide your company with a roadmap for continuity when changes occur. All right, we'll have a few polls throughout the session. We'd love to hear from you. Our first poll today is, does your organization have a succession plan? We'll go ahead and pull that poll up for you now. Just give a few more seconds. All right, so what I see so far is 15% of our audience today, or 14 now, has a formal succession planning process that's used across the organization. Another 28% said most of our teams are engaging in succession planning, but there's no standardized process. Another 28% said we have a few replacement in mind for people who may be leaving soon. Another 21% said we haven't thought about succession at all, and 7% said not sure. So it's great we have a wide mix in the audience today. So let us know, put in the chat if you have any questions along the way. And we'd love to help you no matter where you are in succession right now. All right, the next thing we want to touch on is, what is the difference between succession planning versus replacement hiring? Replacement hiring is the word for what most organizations are doing most of the time when it comes to hiring. The timing is pretty reactive and it begins once the person has already left the organization or perhaps when they give their notice. And in the selection approach, you usually put out the call, collect applications, do interviews, and you choose the best person that is immediately available at that time. And you're usually trying to replicate the incumbent who just left, since there's likely a lot of work being left to that person who's no longer at the organization, and you're just trying to replicate them as soon as possible. The information source for informing the hire is usually input only from the incumbent if they're still present and able to provide information, or otherwise it would just be the supervisor. So it could just be one person hiring for that position based on what they think would be best, rather than using multiple feedback sources. At this time, you select the one person to be the replacement successor. And the objectivity is somewhat based on being at the right place at the right time, although you might add objectivity through assessments and interviews. And the process is hiring done as needed. So to contrast this with succession planning is a lot more proactive in timing as you're preparing way in advance of a vacancy. You're preparing multiple candidates for the role, and when the time comes to when that vacancy does become present, you get to choose the best candidate, even if they're different from the previous incumbent. So you might be able to be more strategic and more open-minded around who is going to be the next person to take this role forward into the future to really fulfill the maximal potential of what that role can be. Succession planning in an ideal state, such as the process used at Sigma, will utilize feedback from multiple sources. You'll ask multiple people, what do you think is important in this role? What competencies are needed? What does success look like? And that gives you a much more robust source of information for choosing the right candidate for the role. Again, you have been preparing a bench of potential successor candidates for each role, and it allows you to select the right candidate based on selection and promotion criteria that are more objective, based on merits, based on seeing how they've done in development, seeing how they rank on different competencies that are necessary for the role. So it can really help objectivity. And the process is more integrated with the employee life cycle, including recruitment, development, and even diversity initiatives. So a second poll of the session today, we're curious to hear about your experience, succession planning or replacement hiring. What does your team do? All right, so thank you for your participation. I'm seeing that 35% today do mostly replacement hiring. That's very normal, so don't feel bad if that's where you're at. But I'm also pleased to see that another 64% is doing a mix today, so that's wonderful. So why succession planning matters? The reality in today's world is that turnover is inevitable in all organization. Rates of turnover today range anywhere from 5 to 40%. So in 1 year. So people will likely be leaving the organization and as well as joining. And succession planning can help you prepare for these vacancies well in advance. It also helps organizations to do a number of things. One that has been particularly important across a wide range of organizations is retaining organization-specific knowledge. A lot of times we also call this institutional knowledge. So this is all of the knowledge and specialization that someone may have gotten for your organization, knowing how your organization does things, what your organization cares about and values, the strategic mission and plan of your organization and where you want to go, any SOPs, any inside information on who in the organization can help you accomplish different tasks. This is all institutional knowledge that can be transferred to others in the organization. But if we're doing replacement hiring and someone leaves the organization very quickly, gives a 1 week notice, you might not have enough time to kind of download that institutional knowledge before they leave. And that's really one of the best factors about succession planning is it gives you that time to transfer institutional knowledge before it's too late. Other things that I mentioned briefly were motivating employees to engage in succession planning, especially through creating a culture of growth and development. So this is going to be a really selling factor to people at your organization. They want to feel invested in, they want to have resources for development, they want to have opportunities to grow and to stretch themselves and feel like they're growing as people and as professionals. So that's something that succession planning inherently does and something we'll talk about in our 6-step process. Doing these different elements of promoting internally, growing employees, talking about where you want to go as an organization, these are all factors that can help you attract and retain staff long term. Things like this can help even posts on Glassdoor, which help to attract better talent into your organization and make people feel encouraged to stay. These are key elements. And lastly, it can really improve objective decision making. So sometimes who we have in the back of our mind as our favored successors are not actually objectively the best person for the role. Sometimes they are, sometimes our intuition can be correct, but other times we might be overlooking people who might even be the best candidate. And succession planning really helps us to look at what's needed, identify each person's potential, and then truly select the best person for the role. So with that, we'll jump into talking about Sigma's 6-step succession planning process. I'll be going through each of these steps in greater detail. So we'll go through one by one, but here's a high-level overview. We'll begin by identifying critical roles, then building success profiles for critical roles. At that time, we'll be ready to nominate successors, assess the development needs of potential successors, then begin development activity with those successors, and measure progress along the way. I also want to point you or have you look at the right-hand side where we have the names of a number of templates that we have available, such as the critical role identification questionnaire, a template for a Sigma success profile, or even a nomination survey succession bench template. These are templates that you can find for free on our website. We give them to anyone who wants to use them. We definitely want you to feel empowered to begin your succession planning journey. And we'll be kind of touching on these and talking about them along the way. All right, so the first step in our 6-step succession planning process is identifying critical roles. The goal here is to identify the roles your organization should target to be a part of your succession program. So most often, even at Sigma, we typically work with organizations and we do start typically at the C-suite or your most senior leadership team. So this is a good place to start because they are indeed critical roles and are really critical to the success of the organization and planning for your future COO, your CEO, your CFO. These are all really important and it's a good place to start if you're just beginning. But we also want to acknowledge that there are many, many critical roles in your organization. And most organizations, you could even say every role is critical because of the fact that you hired them to complete a critical function in your organization, bringing key skills and contributing to operational success. That's why once you begin with your leadership team, we want you to not stop there, but kind of look across the organization. I want you to consider who might be essential to keeping your organization operating and what's the risk if they leave. For example, maybe we think of immediately a CEO is really critical, but maybe at your organization, you provide a software that's really critical for supporting your organization and that's your key offering. Well, maybe in that case, a software engineer who's maybe just an individual contributor is a critical role at your organization. Maybe they have highly specialized knowledge about the software that you use and a lot of institutional knowledge about how you create that software and implement it. So in that case, you might even want to begin succession planning for your software engineers. So we just encourage you to look widely across the organization at this first step and look at anyone else who might be considered. We have here that it could even be administrative staff, it could be a specific department. You might even think that you want to roll out your succession planning program to everyone in your organization if you're able to do so. Something to consider when looking at identifying critical roles is considering areas with high dependencies or little overlap in skill sets. So sometimes we ask questions like, how easily could you find someone like this in the market? Do you have anyone, how many people in your organization do you have that could be promoted to this level? Different questions like that will help you understand how critical a position truly is for your organization. Something else I want to say at this step is to consider, and this is pretty much the only step we say this, is to consider both essential people and essential positions. So at pretty much every other step in the process, we want to be laser focused on the role and not the person in the role. But at this step, it can be a little bit messy. For example, you may have an essential person who really wears 3 hats in the organization. They grew through the organization and they're the director of marketing and strategy and finances all in one. We do see this sometimes. So at this point, we might even need to break that role into 2 or 3 positions and consider the competencies needed for each of those individual roles and hiring for them as separate roles in the future. So that's just an example. This is really one of the only times where we want to kind of consider essential people and essential positions. All right, step 2. So at this point, you've identified the critical roles you want to focus on, and now you're ready to build success profiles for that critical role. The goal here is to describe the competencies that are necessary to perform each critical role. So we recommend creating a success profile for each critical role. And when creating success profiles, you want to consider behaviors that are important in the role itself, for having success in the organization more broadly, especially if this is someone in a senior leadership position. They might need to consider what does success look like in a leadership role. And then also considering success now and in the future. So I'll just show an example. I think that's the easiest way to describe the importance of a success profile. So here in this example, you see we are working towards the critical role or succession position of an HR director. We'll call the current incumbent Jane Smith, and this is an adapted example from a real client that we had in the last few years. Jane Smith's expected vacancy from her role as an HR director is in 2027. But we're considering this high priority at this time, and we really want to focus on her since she plays a key role in the organization and will be leaving within the next 2 years. We have some basic position demographics that we put here, such as the location being in Texas, the area's human resources, and this person is considered a level 2 in the organization, so it's just helpful to understand the basics of the role. And you'll see that right below that we have position criteria. So here we bring in a lot of things that you would see on the job description. And a success profile is used to complement a job description, not fully replace it. But we do still bring in, usually this would be filled all the way down to the bottom even, and we bring in a lot of things that are needed related to experience, education, knowledge, skills, and abilities, and key duties. So for this role, for example, it would be expected that the incoming incumbents would need a bachelor's in HR, have 8+ years of experience in HR, have experience leading teams, designing HR programs, knowledge of benefits and payroll, and skills leveraging HR software. But then we noticed that the next section is really competency focused, the competencies to be a success in this role. And you can see that the middle column is really leadership focused. So since this is a director level position, they are going to be a leader in the organization, and there'll be competencies that they need to have as a leader. And then on the right-hand side, we focus on the core role. So this is more of the competencies that are needed to have success in the role. So to give you an example, on the leadership side, leaders at this organization are expected to be decisive, to be objective, to have good prioritizing skills, and good communication. However, things that are more important in this specific role itself are things like valuing diversity, attracting staff, developing and coaching others, and things like that. We also have a few future-oriented competencies, and we develop these with our clients by really having a conversation around where the organization is going to go in the future, how it's being impacted by technology, any other disruptors, really thinking methodically about what they want to achieve. And that's where we source some of these future competencies. And I should also say that we leverage a lot of different stakeholder input to even design these success profiles in the first place. So for this organization in the future, these were a little bit unique to this organization, but they were going to need social astuteness and more technical orientation, which I thought was interesting, seeing that technical orientation come up as a leadership skill here. And for the role itself of the HR director in the future, it was established that they were going to need vision and client customer focus. So I hope this gives you a better idea of what a success profile is and how it would be developed for a role. So at this time, we're at step 3. So we've identified our critical roles and built our success profiles, and now we're ready to nominate successors for that role. The goal here is to consider potential candidates for each critical role. Tips in this area of nominating successors are to challenge yourself to not only include direct reports, but to think more widely and consider all individuals, even those in cross-functional roles, other departments, or other teams. Sometimes an organization will be a multi-organization where they have different companies within their one organization, and sometimes they even need to consider individuals across different organizations completely. So we really are kind of coming to this point of casting a wide net, not narrowing your focus too much on who you think could be a potential successor, but really looking across your whole organization. Something else here is to think of it as a leadership pipeline feeding into the role rather than simply selecting the next successor. You really want many or multiple candidates at this point to consider. You want to be developing several people, seeing how they develop, seeing how they display their potential, see how they follow through. And then when the vacancy occurs, that's when you choose. Before then, everybody is just simply in the consideration, in the pool to be considered for that next role. And given all this, we can also consider the timeline of the person who's leaving, and we can consider candidates who might be ready for the role soon, as well as those who might be ready in the moderate to long-term future. So sometimes when we do succession planning with an executive team, there'll be people similar to our Jane Smith, head of HR as a director, and she's leaving in 2 years. But sometimes we'll have other people who aren't planning to leave for 8 to 10 years. They're like, I don't even know if I need to do succession planning because I have a long ramp of when I'm planning to be here. And that's a time when we can really consider a range of people, and they can be ready in 2 years or they could be ready in 7 years. And because of that runway, we're able to consider even more people and develop more people and see who emerges over time. So I think showing our templates is really helpful just so you can get a sense of how this looks in action. So here is a succession bench that was developed for one of our clients. Actually, this one was adapted with new names and things like that, but it's just an example. And this would be for the same position of the HR director. So you can see that there has the opportunity to be level A, level B, and level C candidates. This bench here has 2 level A candidates and 1 level B candidate. And to break it down and what that means, a level C candidate is someone who would be ready in 5+ years. A level B candidate would be someone who's ready in 3 to 5 years. And a level A candidate is one that would be ready in 0 to 3 years. So we have 1 level B candidate, which is Sarah Jensen. They were added to this succession bench in June of 2023. Their current position is an HR lead, and their next position is an HR manager. And so you see that there is a gap even in between what the next role is. So today they're an HR lead, but they actually need to become an HR manager before they could become an HR director. So you can see how this truly is a leadership pipeline where you're preparing people over time, but you're even considering people who might need to take on one more role before they're ready. We also have 2 level A candidates, Jerry Cole and Katurazan. And here you can see that Katurazan was actually a level B candidate previously, added as a level B candidate back in April of 2022. And then in June of 2023, actually progressed up to becoming a level A candidate and is an HR manager. You can see that Jerry Cole is also an HR manager. So in this case, they would both be ready to take on the next role of the HR director. So this is what a potential succession bench could look like. All right, so at this point, we've identified our critical roles, we built success profiles for those critical roles, and we nominated successors for the position. So next, we are going to assess development needs of the potential successors on that bench. The goal here is to identify candidates' development needs. Assessing candidate skills is really helpful in a number of ways. It can help you determine the strengths and development areas of each candidate, as well as the development priorities. It can help you to validate each candidate's position on the bench. And it can also help provide a baseline of skill level in which we can evaluate coaching and development success over time. So this is where you are today, and then we can see how you grow later on. And a really helpful way to assess development needs is through a scientifically validated psychometric assessment that can help measure skills related to the succession position. Or other ways are traditional performance reviews. However, if you're going to use your performance reviews, make sure that they are really good and unbiased. For example, sometimes performance reviews can be biased towards scoring based on the level of promotion and raises that can be given. So that can bias performance evaluations to not being quite as true. So there's different ways performance evaluations can have some challenges. So if you're using this, make sure that you really believe in the scoring. Other things that can be used are 360 assessments, where you get a 360 view on how someone's doing. 360 meaning inputs from direct reports, from managers, from colleagues, even clients. At 360 because you're taking an all-around look at that candidate and using that information to inform where they need to develop. So here's an example of our leadership skills profile revised, otherwise known as our LSPR assessment. This is a Sigma Assessment Systems assessment that we offer. And this one actually, I just call it here today to show you because it maps really well to our success profiles. So what we do with our clients is we build success profiles based on our 50 leadership competency model. And then a lot of times our clients will then have all of the people on their benches take our leadership skills profile assessment, and then they get a report that tells them what are their areas of strengths. So here we see that this person's top 3 areas of strength are technical orientation, desire to learn, and open-mindedness, which does fit well with some of the competencies that we saw on that success profile. And then they'll also see lower scoring areas as well. So for example, we don't see right here at the top of the report developing and coaching others. So perhaps that would be a lower scoring dimension, and we would know that that's something that they would need to work on in order to be successful as an HR director. So that's just an example of how assessments can be helpful and how they can help hone in on strengths and development opportunities. All right, now we're to step 5, develop talent. So at this point, you're ready to actually get started in developing the people on your succession bench based on the development needs identified in the last step. So the goal here is to use coaching or other development efforts to take potential candidates and guide their development into capable successors. And I want to just note here that this is actually where we see organizations fall short the most, which is really interesting because this is so important in organizations to provide development opportunities to help them grow. I think I have a little bit of a broken record around that because of how important it truly is. And yet this is where we see organizations stop most often. They go through all the other steps in succession planning, but find this in time and investment in development a little bit more challenging than more of the raw planning elements of the other stages. So this is really important. And what you want to do here is to help, help determine candidates' development priorities and then help them find opportunities to grow in those areas, to learn and practice new skills, to have stretch opportunities. This could involve job shadowing. It could involve other certification programs or continued education. There's a lot of different ways that you can go about developing people. It can include mentorship program, internal coaching, external coaching. And really the purpose is to provide new learning, help them grow, and also help them overcome obstacles and challenges in the way of their successful development. So we have a really simple template here. This one's just to get your ideas going, beginning the brainstorming. So here what we've done is for that same position of the HR director, we've put down the 3 succession bench candidates that we have present. And that's again, Jerry Cole at a level A, Katara Zahn at a level A, and Sarah Jensen at a level B. And then what you would do is you would plan some development activities, and also you'd want to use these notes to be a lot more comprehensive. And this also represents the investment that you're looking to make as an organization in your top candidates and their growth. So for level A candidates, what we're recommending here is job shadowing and executive coaching, as well as participation in group training. So this involves a little bit more resource intensity to fund coaching, to provide time for job shadowing, which takes them a little bit away from their current role, as well as participating in group training. And in contrast, for the level B candidate, we're only recommending self-directed learning and group training for now. So this is to give you a sense of how you might plan for different levels of people on your bench and how you might invest in their talent development. One other thing that I want to say here is that you also need to likely do a lot of work with your organization and the leaders of these people. So the current person in the position, Jane Smith, is likely responsible for her direct reports and making sure that they are able to have the development they need. There's a lot of direct leader support that's needed in this process, as they're the ones that are closest to their direct reports, the everyday activity. They help allocate time and assign workload, as well as actually providing those opportunities. So helping bring in your leaders and provide them with the tools that they need to successfully coach their direct reports can be a key element of having success. All right, now we're to the final step of measuring progress. The goal here is to track progress, boost engagement, and quantify success. So here we like to say that the best metrics to use are those that reflect success in your company. And this is really important because you're going to need to select metrics that you have available to you, ones that your company is interested in, and things that you can capture on a regular basis. So for example, if your company already uses an engagement survey, and that engagement survey has things like generalized satisfaction, as well as the extent to which each employee feels like they're being developed, that could be a really useful metric to capture at the beginning. So you capture that metric, then you do a lot of development efforts and really invest in this process. And then you see, has job satisfaction increased? Do people feel like they're being developed more? So I think that's just one example. And you'll want to really capture these and jot them down and note them somewhere before you even begin your succession plan. You want to record these metrics as a baseline and then update your metrics every 6 months to a year to evaluate progress. And this will also help you to show your ROI to the rest of your organization and show why you're investing in succession planning. Other common metrics that you could use could be turnover, rates of turnover, the percentage of roles filled internally, but you can really be creative and use whichever metrics work well for you. When I was doing consulting with one organization, one that got brought up that I thought was both funny and kind of interesting was they wanted to use the rate at which senior leaders were able to take their PTO. So if leaders were taking their PTO, it meant that they were successfully training and bringing up the next generation of leaders, because if they leave for a week or two, there's people who have some insight into their role and can help kind of fill that gap. Versus if they can never take PTO, that means that maybe they have to always be on and there's no one else in the organization who can support. So here's another template that you can explore on our website. This is called the Talent Progress Scorecard. And we have different indicators or metrics to measure progress over time. And we even capture it at the individual level, the program level, and the organizational level. So this would be an example of if you're setting a baseline, you could look at these different levels. So at the individual level, we have the percentage of employees responding positively to surveys and the percentage of employees who have received assessments for that assess development stage. And then you can put the number there. At the program level, we have the number of employees in employee training programs and the number of positions with 2+ viable successors identified on the succession bench. Then at the organization level, an example is the percent of positions filled by internal candidates. So that's a really interesting one, just to see how many of your positions are filled by internal candidates, as well as the percent of key roles with documented SOPs for transitions. So this just gives you an example, and then each 6 months, you'd want to come in and update this and see your progress over time. All right, so that was our 6 steps in the process. I hope that was interesting and helpful. And now I'm going to talk about a few common pitfalls in succession planning. The most common pitfalls include focusing exclusively on the executive level. So again, that is really an excellent place to start, but ideally you'll keep going. We have a lot of clients who go to the next level so if they start with the C-suite, then they go to VPs and directors, and then they go to senior managers and senior supervisors, and they just keep going. And if you do that, it really creates that leadership pipeline where at each level, you know who could be a replacement, how you move up, the competencies needed at each level, so it can be really useful. The next pitfall is keeping the succession plan a secret. So this is a really interesting and tricky one for a lot of organizations. They, especially, let's say if you know someone is leaving, like you know your CEO is going to be leaving in 3 years, it's tempting to not tell anybody and to keep it all a secret. And if this is you, that is okay, but something that we would recommend you do is to find ways to bring this transparency, even if you don't say every detail. So one way of framing it is as a talent development program. Like we really are just rolling out a talent development program. We want to develop people at all levels. So all of our employees are upskilling and ready to take on the next level as possible. So that's one way of framing it, but keeping everything really hush-hush could do you a disservice. You're not bringing in employees onto the big picture of what you're planning and why. You don't have to call it a succession plan, but it really is good to create communication and transparency. Another common pitfall is delegating all tasks to HR, making it HR's problem, so to speak. And the reason not to do this is that it does take top-down support and direct leadership support to make this really successful. So it needs to be appreciated, owned, and invested in by senior leadership. And it really needs to be owned and invested in by each individual leader as well. Because if HR has all the tasks and duties, but is unable to penetrate the organizational system, you're going to fail to meet the objectives that you're looking for. Another common pitfall that we see is failing to document the process or update the plan over time. Some organizations do see this as a one and done thing, or they don't have anyone focusing on it. And what that can do is it can make it so that the succession plan kind of goes stale. It's not updated. It doesn't reflect the current state of the organization. It doesn't reflect the new positions that have been created. The benches have people who aren't even here anymore. So you really want to keep your succession plan really up to date and a living document that gets updated whenever there's a change. And then lastly, one of our biggest pitfalls is strategic plan implementation. And we call this the greatest hurdle, as 67% of well-formulated strategic plans fail in organizations due to poor execution. Another statistic is that 1 in 3 leaders rate their company as poor or very poor implementing strategic plans. So we think a lot of times that strategic plans are failing because you're doing the front end work, but then you're not investing in the development. But maybe you've experienced this more widely in your experience at organizations developing strategic plans. It's easier sometimes to develop them than to put them into action. So that's our next poll question to you. How successful is your team at implementing strategic plans? All right, I'll just give it about 10 more seconds. All right, so it looks like 14% said that we always follow through on strategic plans. So congratulations, you're in the minority. 42% said we sometimes follow through on strategic plans. 35% said we create strategic plans but rarely follow through and implement. And 7% said we don't really create strategic plans at all. So this is normal. This is what we see with most of our clients, and we really try and help them in this area. But if you take the time to develop a really good succession plan, but fail to develop your talent or adequately prepare each successor for the future position, you're not really accomplishing what you set out to. And if you ever find yourself in this position, this is when working with a consultant can help. Consultants can give you a number of things back. First and foremost is time. By using streamlined methods and outside support to save on administrative efforts, it can be a little bit challenging for the average person to know how to build a success profile. We usually collect a lot of information and our team does the analysis. So that's just one example. A lot of times we feel like we're not even competing with others in this space. We're just competing with time and having time to allocate to this. So I wonder if you ever feel similar. Also, consultants can give you tried and true processes that have been refined over time from organizations facing the same problem. So, we have a really strong 6-step process that we use that has shown to be really effective over time. Consultants can also provide a lot of accountability. We provide a lot of project management and act as strategic partners, and this really helps to hold our clients accountable to their goals. Next is objectivity. Having an outside consultant that's not invested in the outcome in the same way can really help to support unbiased decisions and help you to identify the best candidates with no previous knowledge of the candidates. It can help reduce favoritism and really help highlight the best candidates, of course, with your support and insights. And lastly is expertise by drawing on the many years of experience with clients and seeing and helping people who have been in your shoes. So we're curious to hear from you. What are the greatest challenges your team faces when implementing strategic plans? And you can select all that apply. Is it time, buy-in, knowledge, standardization, having a dedicated team, or long-term commitment? I'll give it about 10 more seconds again. All right, these are pretty split across the categories today, so that's interesting to see. The top one remains time, so it's about as expected. The following one this time is knowledge and long-term commitment, and then about equal for the others, which is buy-in, standardization, and have a dedicated team. So kind of indicates that all of these things can be potential challenges and barriers. So if you want to engage in a next step, we have a free succession planning diagnostic that you can use. I think that Helen can drop the link to that in the chat for you. And it's a really quick 5-minute survey that asks you some key questions that will help provide insight on where you are in terms of your readiness for succession planning today and how far along you might be in your current process. So if you are interested, you can go ahead and complete the free diagnostic survey on succession planning. And we'll also, if you complete that, we'll reach out to you to see if you'd like to have a free 30-minute consultation on where you're doing today. So feel free to take advantage of this free resource and complete the diagnostic, and feel free to go ahead and schedule a call with one of us to have a free half-hour consultation if you're interested. All right, with that, I'll open it up for any questions. Feel free to add your questions to the chat. We probably have about around 8 minutes or so for questions. So let us know what's on your mind.
Thank you very much, Ariana. I don't see any questions yet, so I'm going to start us off with some of our common questions from past webinars. And if that gets the creative juices flowing, like Ariana said, feel free to use the chat to post anything that you would like to know specific to what your own organization is going through. So one that we get often is, you mentioned not delegating succession planning all to one person. So can you talk a little bit more about who should be involved in the planning process?
Definitely, yeah. So who should be involved in the planning process, or at least involved? It's more involved in the initiative. It's okay if HR owns the planning process specifically in some of like the minutia of step to step and some of the organizational communications. But you really want to involve your senior leadership team first and foremost. Your senior leadership team will ideally be fully bought in. Sometimes that can even extend to the board of directors. So the board is often very interested in where is this company going? What's their plan for transition if a senior leader leaves the organization? And things like that. But then you also, as I mentioned earlier, need to bring in the leaders of all of the direct reports that are on your succession benches. So it's really an organizational initiative that can be led by senior leadership and HR, but all driving towards the same goals, having the resources and investment in the process to make sure that it really kicks off and goes forward.
That's great. Thank you very much. I'll also drop a link in the chat for you guys on creating a succession advisory team. Often with our clients or consultants, we'll put together a team that will champion that process internally. And we've got a few steps that you can follow or things to consider as you're building that team. Okay, I see a question with 2 thumbs up. Is there a software for succession planning that we would recommend?
You know, we don't use any softwares ourselves right now. It is something that we're getting increasing questions about. So we have perhaps a few recommendations. Helen, if you want to, we could maybe follow up separately. I know someone on my team is more passionate about this topic of how to integrate with softwares, and there's been one company that we've considered partnering with, so we can provide a little bit information on that. But right now, that's not one of our core service offerings, not something that we specialize in.
Thank you. And yes, we can absolutely reach out via email and talk a little bit more about what that could look like. Okay. How do you assess the existing proficiency levels or skills for identifying potential successors? And use the 9box or any other tool to support that process?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So something that we use, we have a few different sessions available to clients. So one of our common methods is our succession launch. So we launch people into succession with 2 half-day trainings. And in the first session, we really focus on the first 3 steps of the process. And we have our clients fill out a talent review survey. So we have them kind of cast that wide net and thinking about who's possible. We leave about 20 lines for them to input who comes to their mind. And then we have them rate each person across 5 different criteria. And it's some of those things I mentioned earlier. It can be, we have them rate their current role performance on a scale of 1 to 5. So each of these are rated on a scale of 1 to 5. And we have them rate how well they're doing today, how well they work with others, how well they're aligned with the mission, And then we also have them rate their skill sets. So how does it, how well are they skilled compared to others in the organization? And then lastly, the external market validation of how hard would it be to replace this person. So we have them do ratings on 1 to 5 across those. Oh, and sorry, we actually recently added one more, which is what is our motivation to lead, which we've actually found to be a huge predictor of leadership success, is whether or not they have a desire to lead. So if you have an individual contributor who has absolutely zero desire to lead, they're actually not as strong of a candidate, even if you see a lot of potential in them. So we have them do a rating across these 6 areas, and then you get a score, and then we make some recommendations based on that score. So the top would be 30 points. And so it will have them look at who on their bench is scoring over 20, for example, and that can be a way to narrow it down. So in other words, we do use a survey with some inputs to help assess who could be put on the bench, but then we do try and kind of keep it wide and open to then validate later with that assessed talent category. So let me know if that made sense or if you have any follow-up questions. And I'll just add one more point to that, because you mentioned, do we use the 9 box? We do. We do sometimes use the 9 box of organization's desire. And what we do is we do a formal evaluation of what I just said, this talent review survey with a score. We get all of those scores. We also do the leadership skills profile assessment, and we put one score on one axis and the other score on another to form that grid that then you plot all of the people on a current performance, an assessment rated performance, and we put it all on one chart, and then you make those 9 boxes and see who falls into top potential and lowest potential and everything in between.
That's great timing, actually, that you asked that question, because our webinar next month, I dropped a link in the chat for you, is actually on Sigma's 9-box template. So you'll get the template. You can find that on our website too. We have a couple of blogs and guides on how to use that. But we will be having a webinar where one of our consultants will walk you through how to use that template. So if you're interested, do come join us next month, and you'll get a more in-depth walkthrough of how that can be applied in the context of succession and talent development. Okay, we'll do one more question, and then I'd be okay to stay on for a couple more minutes. Ariana, do you have any meetings following this?
Let me check. Sorry about that.
Just seeing
I
quite a
do
bit
have
of.
one more meeting, but
Do
we
you?
can follow
Okay.
up maybe over email if anyone wants to drop their question in their email.
Yes, we can definitely do that. Okay, so we'll finish then with, do you recommend developing an SOP to formalize the succession plan in the organization?
I would, honestly. I think you could follow an SOP that's really close to our 6-step process, but having a formalized process in your organization where you say, this is how we look at critical roles, and this is how we as an organization define how and when a critical role is indeed a critical role. Then as an organization, how do we build success profiles if you do it internally, or you could use someone like Sigma to help you do it. But we have part of that would be like, we have a profile for each role that's really well developed and updated over time. Then a process for how you nominate successors and plan for their development, an SOP for assessing development and doing the actual development. That's actually one of the biggest, as I keep mentioning, that developing talent segment is a really big part of investment. You have to go pretty wide and figure out, how do we want to develop people? What are we going to invest in? Are we going to create development programs? Are we going to provide trainings? So that is probably the most expansive category that could have the most variety by role. And then I would definitely recommend an SOP for measuring progress as well, and measuring that progress over time. And again, as much as we as a field can show our ROI for these activities, the more it will be accepted by those that make the budget.
That's great. Thank you very much. Okay, we are going to wrap it up there. For those of you who are here to get professional development credits for SHRM, I'm just going to launch one more poll, because I will need to know your name so that I can create a certificate of completion for you, particularly for SHRM. So just let me know if you're here for SHRM or ATP professional development credits. SHRM folks, I will send you a follow-up email with the activity code that you need and the certificate of completion. ATP, I believe you can just log in. We're a pre-certified provider of professional development credits, so you should be able to do that without any further information. But please do reach out to us if you're having any issues on that front. And then the last thing that I will say is that if you liked what you saw here today, we are running webinars monthly over the next little while. So take a look at our webinar calendar. And if you'd like to provide any feedback on the session that we had today, we do go through that every month and make changes to our offerings depending on what people are saying. So if you have a few minutes, let us know, and we would really appreciate that. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and thank you, Dr. Ariana Thompson, for the time that you took to be with us. Those of you whose questions we didn't get to, I've noted down your questions and we'll follow up with you via email. So thank you very much, everyone, and we hope you have a fantastic rest of your afternoon.
Thank you so much, everyone. We really appreciate you being here. Have a great day.